Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. So happy to have you here with us. Just about 17 minutes after 6 o'clock this morning. We're going to get into it one time. I want to welcome the Managing Director of A.R.R.O.W to join us via Zoom because we're going to be chatting about a unique opportunity for children going forward. Good morning to you, Mr. Christopher Bonterre.
Morning, Marcus. Morning. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so happy to have you here. Now, first of all, can you tell us what is A.R.R.O.W? What does your company do?
So A.R.R.O.W, the name is an acronym. A.R.R.O.W is an acronym for Aural, Read, Respond, Aural, Write. It's a literacy intervention program that makes fast and permanent changes in children's reading, in their spelling, focus, concentration, motivation, those sorts of things.
Now, you would have started this company based on a need for this sort of service. What are the literacy levels like when you started A.R.R.O.W versus now?
So the company's been around for, well, in Trinidad, 16 years, but I mean, A.R.R.O.W itself has been around close to 50 years. You know, the A.R.R.O.W program is one of the leading intervention programs in the UK. So when we started in 2016, very much on a small scale, you know, literacy, if you're asking about literacy levels, you know, they're up and down. Depending on where you go and who you test and that sort of thing. So it's a difficult question to sort of answer and give a general statement. But if I am to say anything about where we are with our literacy, I'll perhaps have to say that the pandemic, which has kept schools closed, face-to-face schools closed for perhaps close to 2 years, has created a very serious situation in terms of children's learning.
Yeah, understood. But you know, with that being said, the pandemic has afforded people the opportunity to go online to learn. Some schools would have done it. Most schools would have done it. But some people may not have been able to afford that luxury of having a device to go online and stuff like that. So, has your company been looking at ways maybe we can improve pandemic learning and that sort of thing? Is that a part of what you guys do?
So yes, I mean, so if I qualify, so A.R.R.O.W is an NGO. It's a non-profit. It's been working in Trinidad for 16 years in about 200 schools. So we've worked with, you know, hundreds of principals, thousands of teachers. Pandemic learning, if you're asking that question, you're talking about online learning. If you're talking about pandemic learning, I mean,
pandemic learning the way that we learn in a pandemic.
So yeah, so. If I tell you off the bat, online learning for children is not the ideal scenario, for many reasons. Main reason being engagement. But if you want to improve pandemic learning, we can improve pandemic learning. You can ensure that children are tested, that children have proper equipment, proper internet access, resources, you know, and allocate those resources to the schools and then to communities and to families. But also ensuring that there is a need for online learning as opposed to perhaps not necessarily keeping children away from face-to-face learning for too long, because the research has shown that pandemic learning is perhaps, and as a result, online learning is perhaps not the best way for children to sort of continue learning in a medium to long term.
Yeah. And I know that of course it affects the social skills and the ability to socialize and stuff like that in a different sort of way. But tell me, how does A.R.R.O.W decide on which schools that they're going to focus this program on?
Right. So A.R.R.O.W will work with funders. Some schools come directly and ask for help, and we assist them to raise funds, to get the equipment in, to get the software in. Other schools are part of an adopted program. So for instance, we're working with 20 schools in the East Port of Spain area, and that is supported by Shell Trinidad. And that fantastic program, which is running for the next 3 years, has decided to work with their adopted schools that they are investing in heavily, those communities and those schools that Shell has been working with for the last few years. So in that scenario, we would have been directed to work with the 20 primary schools in the Mobile Laventille area. Other schools may just come directly to us. We may identify through the various divisions in the Ministry of Education that there is a school that is perhaps at risk, and can we go in to sort of support them with their literacy and learning?
You mentioned that Shell is one of the corporations that support this, initiatives like this, but I'm curious as to
Yes.
what does that support actually look like? Is it all financial support? What kind of support do these corporations offer?
Right. Right. So no, 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 not at all. So there's a cacophony of things that a sponsor and a funder can do. You can obviously, the software needs to be placed and put onto the system. Tutors go in, trained and certified A.R.R.O.W tutors, UK certified tutors go in and work with these children. So that is part of the funding, but also computers. Software needs to be loaded onto these computers. A lot of these schools have a wonderful library or computer room, but no air condition. So, they support it with infrastructure, with that sort of funding to make sure that the place is conducive to learning. There's also, we put together literacy days where children, parents, families come out, and funders very much get involved with that. Staff will come in and work um, with the program and with the system on those literacy days to support children, to support the storytellers. And so there are a variety of ways that funders will work with us. They also help us with their expertise, obviously, to come in and do workshops to help parents, to help teachers. So, and certainly with where Shell is concerned, they have a dynamic program making sure that what is needed for these 20 schools in the East Portsmouth area, what is needed is going to be given to them, and they're quite pedantic about that.
Nice. Well, it sounds like it's off to a great start. I'm curious, when I was reading through the bio about A.R.R.O.W, I saw something about brain-based learning. Can you explain that to me a bit?
Yes. Yeah, so brain-based learning, and you may think, what is brain-based learning? Because it's an all learning brain-based. So brain-based learning uses proven techniques. So if and it's not a new concept. It's been around for generations. If you had a teacher who really resonated with you and you remember them to this day, they probably applied brain-based learning to your teaching. So brain-based learning says that brain tested techniques and strategies that work with the brain. Let me give you an example. Um, how can you say that you're teaching a young mind in a school and you don't understand how a mind works? You don't understand how a standard one or standard two operates in terms of need to take breaks, about nutrition, about concentration, about engagement. You need to have been trained, and you need to understand how those brains work, perhaps as how a standard one brain works as opposed to a standard five, as opposed to first year and second year. So brain-based learning uses tried and proven techniques to ensure that the learning and the techniques that these students are given is actually working.
Okay.
Engagement, for example. A child will not learn, an adult will not learn unless their visual and their auditory are locked in. That's engagement. If that's locked in, there is learning. If you just have visual and auditory, there's no learning. So again, and coming back to the issue of online learning, sometimes that's missing, and as a result, learning doesn't necessarily take place.
Right. Understood. But I'm curious though, that what you seem to mention there, that sounds like what teachers in general should be learning, how to be able to deal with the audience in front of them, with the students in front of them at the different levels that they may be teaching. So is that not part of regular teacher training?
And I've worked with thousands of teachers in Trinidad and Tobago. There is an element that allows teachers to work with certain techniques that are brain based. If you're faced with 30, 40 children in a class, limited resources, the scenario doesn't always create it. So teachers really have to be innovative, and the tenacity of a teacher to really get children learning, to differentiate which children need more or need a different type of learning, to ensure that children choose topics that are relevant to them, that they're enjoying their work, that they're engaged, that that whole lock-in is there. That's a stock in trade, but it's not always something that perhaps teachers are able to do. Quite often they don't do it. But with and I'm not sort of saying that to sort of this teachers, but they're quite often not given the resources or the environment which they operate in. So, for instance, brain-based learning says students can't operate in noise. But if you're working in and you will know, many primary schools have a blackboard separating standard one from standard two. So I've been sometimes doing a workshop in standard one, and I can hear the standard five teacher at the bottom of the room shouting. So if the environment is not conducive to learning, then these teachers are sort of struggling to do what they were initially taught.
But Christopher, tell me something. This is not the same environment that you guys are going to be going into to be able to do the A.R.R.O.W program.
Right. So A.R.R.O.W is brain-based, focused, but you're on a system. A.R.R.O.W works like this. The key to A.R.R.O.W is the self voice, which we haven't mentioned. A.R.R.O.W.'s key success instrument is the self voice. Students listen in the sound of their own voice, as you and I do. We think in the sound of our own voice, and we access something on the lexion. So A.R.R.O.W locks in someone into a system with a headphone. They're sitting on a computer system, and they're working because they would have had a diagnostic test. So they've been working at an ideal pace, at their perfect level, locked into a system that doesn't allow for noise, and working through relevant material that they have chosen. So you see, I mentioned about brain-based learning. So engagement is there, lock-in, visual, no noise, working at the environment, enjoying it because they have chosen the topics, but it's all to do with their learning at their level. So A.R.R.O.W, in a way, is a tool that shows how a brain-based learning, an ideal brain-based learning scenario can operate in a school and has been operating in schools in Trinidad for the last 15 years.
How long does the program last for?
So it depends. We will assess a child. So, for instance, we will assess thousands of children over the next 3 years. But we will assess, for instance, we will go into a standard 4 or 5, and we will assess the children there to see what their reading age is, what their spelling age is, as opposed to their chronological age. Based on that result, we can then, A.R.R.O.W prescribes where they go onto it to meet material and to lock themselves in, listen to their own voice, take dictation of their own voice, and work through that. That can be anything from 8 hours to 10 hours. It doesn't matter if those 8 hours or 10 hours of A.R.R.O.W intervention takes place 10 days in a row, twice a week, for 5 weeks, or once a week for 10 weeks. The result will be the same. A.R.R.O.'s benefit is speed. If you work on A.R.R.O.W for 10 days and work 1 hour a day, that's 10 hours. And what happens is we reassess at the end of the program, and children can jump anything from 8 months to 3 years in their reading and spelling after just 8 or 10 hours.
Nice, man. Well, this is very, very interesting. Tell me, what do you see the future of A.R.R.O.W being before we wrap up?
We've started working with standard fives after the pandemic, post pandemic. So we started getting back into schools, helping the standard fives focus and concentrate for SCA this month. That's our first point of call. But what we're really thinking about is preventing something called a learning crisis from becoming a generational pandemic. And I really mean that when I say it, because if you think about it, Ruckus, think of yourself out of school for 2 years. You were in standard 5, and all of a sudden you've been thrown into standard 3. Think what you've missed. What A.R.R.O.W wants to do, and where A.R.R.O.W sees itself, is working with organizations like Shell and BHP and Finance Foundation, with communities, making sure that children are assessed. We know where they are with their regression in learning, and that resources are put into place, A.R.R.O.W and other tools like A.R.R.O.W put into place to help children get back to where they were before the pandemic, and to also ensure that children who have learning disabilities, children who are struggling behind the level of their peers, that everyone has a chance in primary school, a fighting chance to sort of make a difference and to get their literacy, learning, focus, concentration, and motivation up where it should be. We're committed to that 100%.
All right. Well, I wish you all the best with that commitment and that journey ahead. I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning and sharing a bit of it.
Ruckus, thank you very much, and a happy belated birthday to you as well.
Well, thank you very much, sir.